Hello, students. So in this video, we are going to talk about the standard formula that's used for linear functions. So when we're looking at a graph and it has a straight line, I'm going to be referencing this drawing. You don't have to draw it in your notes, but I'm going to reference it throughout the video. When we're looking at a straight line, there's actually a standard formula, kind of like when we did stuff with triangles, trapezoids, circles. There was some sort of standard formula to either find like the perimeter, the area, the circumference, just depending on the shape. In a graph that has a straight line or what's called a linear function, there's also a standard formula that we can use to help identify a couple of things about the line. We can talk about the steepness of the line or how what's called the slope of the line. We can also look at where the line is crossing the X and Y axis. So we're going to learn what this standard formula is today. And there's a lot of different variables, so letters, that are in this formula. And we're going to talk about what they mean. So you should have received a graphic organizer or a notes template for you to fill in. If you did not get this, in a moment, I'm going to kind of rearrange the camera so you can see this full thing better. But you can go ahead and title this page Standard Formula of a Linear Function. And then once you have that titled, go ahead and get your graphic organizer and get ready to fill it in. I am going to pause the video on my own end so I can rearrange the camera so we can fill this in a little bit easier. Okay, everybody, so this is what your graphic organizer should look like. If you did not get this page, you can go ahead and turn your notebook horizontally and copy it down. I am going to zoom in so we can discuss the top part, and then we're going to fill in. So you'll notice that the formula is already written for us. It is y equals mx, and then this symbol means plus or minus. We'll talk about it a little bit more in depth. Plus or minus the letter b. So let's get into what each of these are, and then we'll go into a little bit more depth and explanation in each of the columns. So the first thing we're going to do is let's talk about what this symbol means. So this is a positive sign and a negative sign, or an addition sign and a subtraction sign, whatever you want to think about, on top of each other. And this means plus or minus. So plus or minus, meaning in our formula, we will either be adding this b, and we'll go over what b represents in just a moment, or we're subtracting b. So it really just depends on the line. We'll get a little bit more in depth as we go, but it means that this equation could be mx plus b or mx minus b. It just depends. We're not going to use plus and minus in the same formula. It just means it could be either or. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about X and Y, because this is the standard formula for a linear function or a linear equation or a linear graph, like whatever linear thing it is that we're looking at. This X and Y represent the X and Y on a coordinate plane. Okay, so simply put, this is going to be the Y value when we're looking at an ordered pair. So it's the Y value in an ordered pair. The X is going to be the X value in an ordered pair. So essentially what that means is when we use this formula, if we plug something in for X and we have what M and what B are, we can solve this to figure out what is the corresponding Y value. So like essentially we can figure out where a point is on our graph. And we'll get a little bit more in depth with that in the next lesson, but these stand for the X and Y values on the coordinate plane. Okay. M, which I don't know why they picked M, if I'm personally, like, if I need to get on my soapbox for a second, because M stands for the slope of the line. The slope of the line. So we'll get a little bit more into what the slope of the line is, but slope has to do with steepness, like how steep or how flat the line is. You would think they would use like S or maybe P, like, I don't know, something that represents slope a little bit more than M. Maybe it's because M has like slopes. It has like curved slopes. I don't know. But personally, I don't understand why they chose that variable. If you know, or if you Google it and you find something out, please let me or your teacher know. But M stands for the slope of the line. And then B, I understand why they chose the letter B here, because B actually stands for the y-intercept. Okay, so remember, the y-intercept is where a line or a point crosses the y-axis. So they already have y over here to represent the y value. So they needed a different letter to represent the y-intercept. So again, I'm not 100% sure why they chose the letter B, but I understand why they chose a different letter from y. So this is what all of our variables mean in this particular standard formula. Okay, so this is the formula we're going to use if we need to graph a line, or if we're looking at a line, how we can write kind of like a formula that represents the line we're looking at. We have our y and our x that represent the x and y values. M represents the slope of the line. B represents the y-intercept, where the line is going to cross the y-axis. And then this means that we're either going to be adding the y-intercept or subtracting the y-intercept. It just depends on the line, okay? So I'm going to kind of go into slightly more depth with each of these, so that way you can kind of see it or understand it a little bit better. So let's start with the x and y values, okay? So y is a given y value from an equation, or it could be from a table, one of those XY tables, or from a point on a graph. Okay, so I'm going to show you how we can use this standard formula when we're looking at what are called linear equations, when we're looking at a graph, when we're looking at an XY table. So this Y value can be given to us in a variety of ways, either from an equation table or from a point on a graph. Okay, and then same thing for the X value. The X value is a given X value from an equation table or from a point on a graph. So a given X value from equation, table, or point on a graph. Okay, so depending on the problem, this is, y equals mx plus or minus b. That's an equation technically. So there may be instances where we have to solve for one of these things. We have to solve for the slope or solve for the y-intercept. And in doing so, they have to give us the other three pieces of information, or else we can't solve the equation, right? If we're not given the x, the y value, and the slope, then we can't figure out what the y-intercept is if we're only given the equation. So it's important that we understand kind of where they might give us this information. It might not just be, hey, x equals this. They might say, look at this table. When y is 7, what is x? And you have to find where, 7 is, and then look at the x value. Again, when we go over in our next lesson how we kind of apply this standard formula to graphs, it'll make a little bit more sense. So just go with me here with the definitions. Okay, when it comes to M, or the slope, okay, slope is a number. You could put as a number or as a value. I'm going to put value. Is a value that measures steepness of a line. Okay, so is it, if it's really, really steep, it's like almost vertical, or is it like more flat? Slope is a number that measures the steepness of a line. Okay, and we calculate slope by finding the change in x and y values. Okay, so if we're trying to figure out how steep something is, we have to look, how are the x and y values changing if we look at the points on a graph? What's the difference? Are they increasing by 2? Are they decreasing by 3? Like, what is happening? Okay, something else that is going to be helpful with slope is, especially when we're looking at a graph, slope is measured by taking the rise. Again, how much is the graph increasing by taking the rise over the run. The run is like horizontally. So rise could be thought of as like the y values, and the run can be thought of as the x values, but it's not what is the y value and what is the x value, it's the change. Okay, so change is represented in math a few different ways. You're going to start seeing me use a triangle Because triangle is the symbol delta, I believe, in Greek. And delta in Greek, when we use it in math, it means change. So when we're looking at the change in y and x values, we're looking at what is the difference between like how far the line is increasing versus how far it's like going over. And again, we have a whole lesson on slope, specifically like how we calculate the number, but this is just kind of the overall definition. Okay. And then the last thing is B, the y-intercept, which is something that we went over a little bit when we talked about the coordinate plane. Okay. So I'm just going to reference this image for a second so you can see. So the y-intercept is where the line crosses the y-axis. So here is our y-axis, and I've drawn a couple of lines. There's a blue line, a red line, and then a black or brown line here. I drew a point where it crosses the y-axis. So even something that's like a perfectly horizontal line, it can also cross the y-axis. So at that point is where we would say the y-intercept is. And you'll notice that, like in this case, this would be a negative number because it's on the negative side of the y-axis. Okay. So when we're looking at a y-intercept, the plus or a minus in the actual formula is really important. Okay. So the definition of a y-intercept is the point that crosses the y-axis. Okay, so you could draw yourself a picture like how I just had if you want. I'm not going to. So if we're looking at an equation where we have y equals mx, and let's just say it's -3. The m and the x and the y don't really matter. We're just going over what is the y-intercept, okay? The y-intercept, or b, in an equation like this is going to be -3. Okay, we're going to attach the luggage just like how we did with equations to the sign. So the y-intercept, I'm going to scratch that. It's not equals. The y-intercept is equal to -3. That means it's going to cross where y is equal to -3 on the x-axis. Okay, so if you want to write yourself a little note to attach the luggage, you can. Okay. Did I spell attach right? I'm not very good with spelling, so if I misspelled it, I'm sorry. Okay, so to kind of put all of this into perspective, because this was a lot of definitions, and I should have warned you about that at the start, so my apologies. I am actually going to do 2 practice questions with you so you can see, and then the other 2 you can do on your own. If you want to try to just do all the practice questions yourself, as soon as I give all the practice questions to you, you can pause the video, try it yourself, or you can follow along to see 2 examples before you do the other 2. Okay, so in your notebook, and to put this into your notebook, you can just fold it in half and then tape it like on the side here. If your notebook is big enough where you can just like lay it flat and tape it in, you could do that as well. But my suggestion is just going to be to like tape it so that way you can flip it open and look over it. Okay. So here are your practice questions. Okay. What you're going to do is you're going to identify the slope and the y-intercept. And so these are going to be number answers. Okay. So you have 3x plus 7 equals y equals -2x minus 8, and y equals 1/4 x plus 12, and then 0.6x minus 2 equals y. Okay. So I'm going to do number 1 and number 2 with you. If you want to try them on your own real quick, you can pause and then check. But if you are not going to do that, let's just do number 1 and number 2 on our own. Okay. So the fact that they put it in this order doesn't change anything. We can rewrite it like the standard form. So y equals 3x plus 7. So if I want to find the slope, remember, is m. So according to our standard form, m is the coefficient of x. It's always going to be attached to x or multiplied. So in this particular equation, m is equal to 3. So the slope of this line is 3. And then the y-intercept is b. So whatever is being added or subtracted, and what's being added here is 7. So this the y-intercept is +7. I'm not going to write a positive sign because if we don't write a symbol, we assume the number's positive. So the slope of this line is 3. And then where this line is going to intersect the y-axis is at 7. Let's do another one. We have y equals negative 2x minus 8. So I don't have to rearrange it. They kind of give it to us in that standard form. M is the coefficient of x, or the number that's right next to x, according to the standard formula here. Okay. We are also going to make sure in this case we attach the luggage. This is a -2, right? So the slope of this line is -2. And we'll talk about when we do our lesson on slope, like what does a negative slope versus a positive slope, like how does that affect the lines on a graph? And then our y-intercept is going to be whatever we are adding or subtracting. So that's going to be 8, but we're going to attach the luggage. This is going to be a -8. So that means y is going to cross the y-axis. Or I'm sorry, the line is going to cross the y-axis at -8. So all I want you to do in the final two are to identify what is your slope M and what is your y-intercept B. Don't forget to attach the luggage. If you have any questions, I know this video is a little confusing. Reach out to your teacher to see if there's any other videos or links that they can share to kind of help your understanding. When we do our next lesson, which is basically taking these and putting them on a graph, it'll probably help your understanding a lot more. Check the table of contents for the answers to these 2 practice questions. And as always, please reach out if you have any other questions or concerns. Bye.